Easter Sunday, April 13th, 1873. Grant Parish, Louisiana. 11:47 in the morning. Reverend Benjamin Allen is on his knees on the courthouse steps. His hands grip a leather-bound Bible so hard his knuckles have gone white. Around him, 150 black men, women, and children are singing. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Their voices rise into the warm spring air, mixing with the sound of children crying and mothers praying. 300 yards away through the cotton fields, torches are moving closer. Not 3 or 4, 300 torches. White men on horseback carrying rifles, singing their own songs. Songs about killing. The smell of kerosene drifts on the wind. Reverend Allen keeps praying, but his voice is shaking now. Behind him, Levi Nelson checks his rifle one more time. It's an old Union Army weapon, the same one he carried when he fought for freedom 8 years ago. His hands are steady, but his heart is pounding, because he knows what's coming. They all know what's coming. In 4 hours, the courthouse steps will be covered in blood. Every man holding a rifle will be hunted down and shot. Every woman screaming for mercy will watch her husband die. Every child will become an orphan. 150 people, most of them on their knees praying, will be slaughtered. And for 150 years, this massacre will be erased from every history book in America. Not mentioned in schools, not taught to your children, not carved on any monument except one that celebrates the killers. Until right now, until this moment, until you. What you're about to learn will shatter everything you think you know about American history. You're going to find out why your great-great-grandfather lost his land, why your family never built wealth, why the vote was stolen from black communities for 90 years. And it all goes back to this one blood-soaked Easter Sunday in a small Louisiana town you've probably never heard of. By the end of this video, you'll understand why voter suppression exists today. You'll see how the United States Supreme Court legalized white terrorism. You'll learn that your ancestors weren't helpless victims waiting for white saviors. They were warriors. They were elected officials. They governed entire counties. They built political power so strong that it took 300 armed men and a Supreme Court decision to destroy it. This isn't ancient history. This is your family's story. If your ancestors lived anywhere in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, or South Carolina in the 1870s, this affected them directly. The political power stolen at Colfax is your stolen inheritance. The wealth destroyed that day should be in your bank account right now. The democracy they killed that Easter Sunday is the reason you still fight for voting rights today. Your ancestors died defending their right to vote, not asking for it, not begging for it, defending it, with rifles in their hands and Bibles in their pockets. And when they were slaughtered for it, the highest court in America ruled that their murders were legal. After this video, you'll never look at voting rights the same way. You'll never accept the lie that racism is just ignorance or personal prejudice. You'll see it for what it really is: a system, a structure, a machine designed to steal power and wealth from black communities, backed by law enforced by violence and protected by the Supreme Court. This is the Colfax Massacre. This is the story they buried. This is your history, and it's time you knew the truth. Let's go back to the beginning. Not April 13th, but 8 years earlier, 1865. The Civil War just ended. 4 million enslaved people are suddenly free, and white America is terrified. Not just Southern whites, Northerners too. Because freedom means something specific and threatening. It means black men can vote, can run for office, can govern, can build wealth, can become equals. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery in December 1865, but that wasn't enough to guarantee real freedom. So in 1868, the 14th Amendment made black people full citizens, and in 1870, the 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote. 3 constitutional amendments in 5 years. the most radical transformation in American history, from property to citizens to voters in half a decade. This period is called Reconstruction. And here's what they never taught you in school. Reconstruction worked. Black men didn't just vote, they won elections. They became sheriffs, tax collectors, state legislators, congressmen, even senators. In South Carolina, black men became the majority in the state legislature. In Louisiana, they held positions of power across dozens of counties. They wrote laws, they collected taxes, they enforced justice, and they did it well. Better than the white governments before them. They built public schools where none existed. They created hospitals. They established public works programs. They wrote state constitutions so progressive that some of their provisions are still used today. All of this while facing daily death threats, while raising families, while farming land they'd just been allowed to own, while learning to read in schools they'd just been allowed to enter. Your ancestors went from being owned as property to owning property in less than a decade. From being whipped for learning to read to writing state laws in one generation. Show me any other people in human history who rose that fast. Show me any other group who rebuilt from absolute zero and in 10 years had senators and congressmen and governors. There's only one word for what they accomplished. Extraordinary. But white supremacy couldn't allow it, couldn't compete with it. So they did what they always do when black excellence threatens white power. They destroyed it, with violence, with terrorism, with massacres like Colfax. Now let's zoom into Grant Parish, Louisiana, in 1872. This is ground zero. This is where the war over Reconstruction turns hot. Grant Parish was brand new, created just 3 years earlier in 1869. They named it after President Ulysses S. Grant, the Union general who won the war and now occupied the White House. The parish seat was a tiny town called Colfax, population, maybe 1,000 people sitting right on the Red River. The demographics tell you everything you need to know. 2,400 black residents, 1,200 white residents. Black people were the majority, which meant under the new voting laws, black people would control the government. And in November 1872, that's exactly what happened. William Ward, a black man, won the election for sheriff. Daniel Shaw, another black man, won tax collector. The parish judge, the clerk of court, the entire government turned black almost overnight. This wasn't a symbolic victory. This was real power. The sheriff controls law enforcement. The tax collector controls revenue. These positions meant black men could protect their community from white violence and fund black schools and infrastructure with tax money. The white Democrats in Grant Parish looked at those election results and said no, not happening. They didn't say it politely. They didn't file lawsuits. They said it with rope and rifles. Their leader was a man named Christopher Columbus Nash. Yes, that was his real name. Christopher Columbus Nash. A former Confederate officer who'd spent 4 years trying to keep black people enslaved, and now he was watching black people govern the very parish he considered his birthright. Nash declared himself the real sheriff. Didn't matter what the ballot said. Didn't matter what the law said. He gathered up every white Democrat in the parish and announced that no black government would stand in Louisiana, not while he was breathing. He rode through black neighborhoods at night, making threats: burn your house, hang you from a tree, kill your children. Whatever it took to make black people too terrified to govern. The black community had a choice: surrender the election they'd won fairly, give up the power they'd earned legally, let white supremacy steal their vote, or fight back. They chose to fight, and the man who organized that fight was named Levi Nelson. Levi Nelson was 40 years old in 1873. He'd been born enslaved on a cotton plantation not far from Colfax, spent the first 32 years of his life as property. But when the war came, when Union forces pushed into Louisiana, Levi ran, joined the 6th United States Colored Heavy Artillery Regiment, fought in 3 major battles, learned discipline, learned tactics, learned how to command men under fire. When the war ended, he came back to Grant Parish. A free man married a woman named Martha, had 5 children, and started building a life as a blacksmith. Levi knew how to work iron, but he also knew how to work strategy. He understood that Nash and his white militia weren't going to stop with threats. They were coming for blood. So in early April 1873, Levi did something that terrifies white supremacy to this day. He organized a black militia, armed black men, trained them, drilled them in military formations, and he gave them a mission: defend the courthouse, protect the elected government, hold the line. Alongside Levi was Alexander Tillman, 34 years old, born free in New Orleans, which made him rare. Most black people in Louisiana had been enslaved, but Alexander's parents had bought their freedom decades earlier, and they'd raised him with education. He could read Latin and Greek. He taught at the Freedmen's School in Colfax, where former slaves learned to read for the first time in their lives. Alexander wasn't a soldier like Levi. He was a politician, a Republican Party organizer, a man who believed in the power of the vote and the rule of law. Alexander is the one who kept sending telegrams to Governor William Kellogg in New Orleans begging for state militia support, explaining that Nash was threatening violence, warning that without help, blood was coming. The governor promised support, promised to send troops, but the troops never came. They were always a week away, always delayed, always too late. Then there was Reverend Benjamin Allen, 58 years old, a Methodist preacher with a voice that could shake the walls when he got going. Benjamin had lost his wife and children back in slavery, sold away to different plantations, and he never saw them again. Freedom didn't bring them back, but it gave him a new family, his congregation, his community. 200 black souls who gathered every Sunday to sing and pray and remember that God had delivered them from bondage once, and he could do it again. Reverend Allen wasn't a warrior by training, but he became one by necessity. He understood something crucial, that this fight wasn't just political, it was spiritual. This was about whether black people had the God-given right to govern themselves, or whether white supremacy could override the will of the Creator. So when Levi Nelson asked him to come to the courthouse to lead prayers to keep spirits strong, Benjamin said yes, without hesitation. And then there were the young ones, like Cuffy, 19 years old, born in 1854, which meant he'd never been enslaved, never wore chains, never called anyone master. Cuffy represented the first generation of black Americans born into freedom, and he couldn't imagine living any other way. When older folks talked about compromise, about maybe letting Nash have some power to avoid violence, Cuffy would shake his head. "I'll die before I let them take our vote." That's what he said, over and over. "I'll die first." There was Jesse McKinney, 45, another Union Army veteran. Fought at the Battle of Milliken's Bend in 1863, one of the first major engagements where black soldiers proved they could fight as fiercely as any white regiment. Jesse had a bullet scar on his left shoulder and a limp in his right leg from that battle. He'd given his body for freedom once already. He was ready to do it again. His wife Hannah begged him not to go to the courthouse. They had 4 children, 4 babies who needed their father. But Jesse looked at her and said, "If I don't go, those babies grow up without the vote. Better they grow up without a father than without freedom." These men weren't outliers. They weren't radicals. They were normal black citizens doing what Americans are supposed to do, defending democracy, protecting elected government, standing up to terrorism. If they were white, we'd call them patriots. We'd build statues of them. We'd name schools after them. But they were black, so history buried them. Until now. Early April 1873. Nash makes his move. On April 8th, he rides through black neighborhoods with 50 armed men torching homes. Jesse McKinney's house burns to the ground. His family barely escapes. The message is clear: leave Colfax or die. But instead of running, the black community does the opposite. They gather. On April 9th, Reverend Allen calls an emergency meeting at the church. 200 people show up, mostly men, but some women too. Levi Nelson stands at the front and lays out the plan. We take the courthouse. We hold it. We defend our elected officials. We wait for the governor to send help. Who's with me? Hands go up. Not everyone. Some folks are too scared and nobody blames them. White terrorism is designed to create that fear. But enough hands go up. 150 men volunteer to stay at the courthouse around the clock. They'll bring weapons, old rifles, hunting guns, whatever they have. They'll bring food, enough for a week, maybe 2. They'll dig trenches around the courthouse, build barricades, turn that building into a fortress. Alexander Tillman sends another telegram to Governor Kellogg. We are fortifying the courthouse to protect legal government from armed insurrection. Send militia immediately. The governor's response is maddeningly vague. Help is coming. Hold on. But no troops arrive. The black militia moves into the courthouse on April 10th. They work fast, digging ditches, stacking furniture against windows, positioning their meager weapons at strategic points. 30 rifles, maybe 20 pistols, some knives and axes. Against what they know is coming, it's nothing, but it's what they have. Levi assigns shifts, 8 hours on guard, 8 hours rest. He sets up a command post on the 2nd floor where he can see approaching threats from every direction. Every morning at dawn, Reverend Allen leads prayer. The whole militia gathers, bows their heads, and Benjamin's voice rises up. Lord, we are your children. We were slaves. You freed us. We were voiceless. You gave us the vote. Now enemies surround us. Grant us courage. Grant us strength. Grant us victory, or grant us a death worth dying. Amen. They sing hymns. Nobody knows the trouble. I've seen becomes their anthem, sung quietly at night when spirits are low, sung loudly at sunrise when courage needs renewing. The women bring food, cornbread, beans, salt pork. They bring news from town. Nash is gathering more men, riders coming in from neighboring parishes, white militias forming up. The numbers keep growing. 200, 300, maybe more. On April 12th, the day before Easter, scouts report that Nash's forces are assembling just outside town. They've got a cannon, a small one but still, artillery. The black militia has rifles and prayers. Nash has a cannon and 300 men. The math is ugly, but nobody leaves, because leaving means surrendering the vote, surrendering power, surrendering everything their people fought for, everything their children deserve. So they stay, they pray, they wait. Easter Sunday, April 13th, 1873. The sun rises over the Red River at 6:04 in the morning. Reverend Allen is already awake, already praying. He gathers everyone for a sunrise service, reads from the Gospel. Christ rose on Easter. He conquered death. He defeated the powers of darkness. Today we rise too. We rise to defend our freedom. And if death comes, let it find us standing. Let it find us faithful. The men say amen. Some of them are crying. They know what's coming. They're not stupid. They're not naive. They know Nash isn't riding out here to negotiate, but knowing doesn't change their choice. They stay. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the white militia appears. 300 men, maybe more. Some reports say 500. They come on horseback, rifles slung across saddles, pistols on hips. They're not hiding. They're not sneaking. They're coming straight down the main road into Colfax like an army marching to war. And at the head of that army is Christopher Columbus Nash. Nash rides right up to the courthouse perimeter and stops. He sits there on his horse looking at the black men stationed behind their barricades, and he shouts, "You boys got 1 hour. Lay down your weapons and get out. We're taking back this courthouse. We're taking back this parish. And if you don't leave, we'll kill every last one of you." Levi Nelson signals Alexander Tillman. Go talk to him. Try reason. Alexander doesn't want to. He knows Nash won't listen, but he grabs a white cloth, ties it to a stick, and walks out through the barricade. His hands are up. His voice is steady. "We are the legal government of this parish. Governor Kellogg appointed us. We have every right to be here. We're not leaving." Nash spits on the ground. "Niggers got no rights white men are bound to respect. You remember Dred Scott? That's still true. You got 1 hour, then we start killing." Alexander walks back to the courthouse, tells Levi what Nash said. Levi nods. He expected nothing different. He gathers the militia. "Men, you heard him. They're giving us an hour to surrender. Anyone who wants to leave, leave now. No shame. You got families. You got lives. But anyone who stays, we fight to the end. Nobody leaves. Not one man." They check their weapons. They pray one more time. They wait. The hour passes. 10:30 becomes 11:30. At 11:33 in the morning, Nash gives the signal. The white militia opens fire. No warning. No final demand. Just gunfire. Hundreds of rifles shooting at once. The sound is deafening. Bullets slam into the courthouse walls, shatter windows, kick up dirt around the barricades. The black militia fires back. Levi shouts commands from the second floor. "Hold your fire till you see clear targets. Don't waste ammunition. Make every shot count." Jesse McKinney takes careful aim and drops one of Nash's riders, then another. For a few minutes it feels like maybe they can hold. Maybe they can survive this. But the ammunition runs out fast. 30 rifles against 300. Old weapons that jam and misfire against new repeating rifles that fire smooth and deadly. One by one, the black defenders fall back. A bullet catches Cuffy in the leg. He screams but keeps firing. Another man takes a round through the chest and dies instantly. Women who stayed to help are pulling wounded men to safety, trying to stop bleeding with torn fabric and prayer. At 1:30 in the afternoon, Nash orders the cannon moved up. They wheel it into position, load it, and fire. The cannonball punches through the courthouse wall. Bricks explode inward. The second shot takes out part of the roof. The building is disintegrating around them. Levi knows it's over. They can't win. They never could. But they've made their stand. They've shown that black men will fight for their rights, that democracy is worth dying for. He makes the hardest decision of his life. He tells the men to stop firing. We surrender. White flag. Maybe Nash will take prisoners. Maybe some will survive. It's the only choice left. Reverend Allen grabs the white cloth. He holds his Bible in his other hand and walks out the courthouse door. His voice rings out clear and strong. We surrender. We are Christians. We are unarmed. We surrender. Nash waves his men forward. Bring them out. Disarm them. The black men file out slowly, hands raised, laying their rifles on the ground. They kneel in the dirt, hands behind their heads. 150 men on their knees, praying, waiting for mercy. And then Nash gives the order. He doesn't say it loud, just a nod, just a signal. And the white militia opens fire, point blank, into the backs of unarmed men. Reverend Allen is still holding his Bible when the bullet goes through his chest. He falls forward, blood soaking into the leather binding. Levi Nelson tries to run. He makes it 10 steps before 3 men chase him down and bayonet him to death. Jesse McKinney is on his knees begging for his children when someone shoots him in the head. Alexander Tillman's body, already dead from the first shot that morning, gets dragged behind a horse through town and then burned. The killing doesn't stop at the courthouse. Nash's men hunt down anyone who runs. They chase black people into the woods like animals. They release hunting dogs. They find people hiding in barns, in cellars, in fields. They kill them all. Men, women, some children. Anyone associated with the militia. Anyone who voted Republican. Anyone who dared to think they had rights. Cuffy makes it to the river. He's bleeding from his leg wound, dragging himself through mud and reeds. He can hear the dogs behind him. He slides into the water, trying to swim across. The current is strong. He's weak from blood loss. A rifle cracks from the shore. The bullet hits him in the back. His body floats downstream and washes up 3 days later, bloated and unrecognizable. By 6 o'clock that evening, it's over. The killing stops not because Nash runs out of targets, but because he runs out of daylight. The official count is 150 black people dead. Some historians think it's closer to 280. Nobody counted the women. Nobody counted the children. Nobody kept precise records because the killers didn't want records. They wanted terror and silence. Nash orders the bodies left where they fell. Don't touch them. Don't bury them. Let them rot. Let every Negro in Louisiana see what happens when you try to vote. The corpses lie in the spring heat for 3 days. The smell spreads across Colfax. Buzzards circle. Dogs tear at the bodies. It's a warning written in decomposing flesh. On April 15th, federal troops finally arrive. 2 days too late. They find a massacre site. Blood everywhere. Bodies stacked like cordwood. The courthouse riddled with bullet holes. They take photographs. They collect evidence. They interview survivors, the few who escaped. And they write reports that go straight to Washington. Governor Kellogg sends a furious telegram to President Grant. This is domestic terrorism. This is insurrection against lawful government. Arrest Nash and his entire militia. Grant authorizes federal prosecution under the Enforcement Act of 1870, a law designed specifically to protect black voting rights from terrorist violence. Federal marshals arrest 97 white men, including Nash. Finally, it looks like justice might happen. The survivors scatter. Martha Nelson, Levi's widow, takes her 5 children and flees Grant Parish with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Hannah McKinney and her 4 children become homeless overnight. Families that owned land abandon it because staying means death. White residents move in and claim the property. No deeds, no sales, just theft backed by rifles. The local newspapers tell a completely different story. The New Orleans Times headline reads, "Negro Insurrection Crushed." The article describes armed black radicals who seized the courthouse illegally and fired on white citizens trying to restore order. 3 heroic white men died defending civilization. The massacre of 150 black people gets rewritten as a justified response to black aggression. This is the version that spreads across America. This is the version that gets believed. And this is where the betrayal gets even worse. This is where the system reveals itself. Because 97 white men got arrested, 97 terrorists who participated in mass murder, the federal government prosecuted them under the Enforcement Act. And out of 97 defendants, only 9 went to trial. Out of 9 on trial, only 3 got convicted. William J. Cruikshank, John P. Hadnot, and William D. Irwin. 3 men convicted of murdering 150 people. 3. But those 3 convictions, they didn't last. The case went to the United States Supreme Court, and in 1876, 3 years after the massacre, the Supreme Court issued a ruling that would shape American history for the next 150 years. The case was called United States versus Cruikshank, and what the court decided still affects you today. Right now, this moment, Chief Justice Morrison Waite wrote the opinion. And here's what he said. The 14th Amendment only restricts state action. It doesn't apply to private individuals. Therefore, the federal government has no authority to prosecute private citizens for violating the civil rights of other citizens. That's a state matter. Read that again, slowly. Let it sink in. The Supreme Court ruled that when white terrorists murder black voters, the federal government can't stop them, can't prosecute them, can't protect black citizens, because the 14th Amendment only applies to state governments, not to individual killers. Think about what that means. It means lynching is legal as long as the state doesn't do it directly. It means if a white mob burns down your house, the feds can't help you. It means domestic terrorism against black people is a local issue, and in the South, local governments were run by the same white supremacists doing the terrorizing. This ruling didn't just free the Colfax killers. It opened the floodgates. It told every white supremacist in America that you can murder black people with impunity. As long as you're not wearing a government uniform when you pull the trigger, you're safe. The massacres that followed Colfax Hamburg in 1876, Wilmington in 1898, Elaine in 1919, Tulsa in 1921, all of them happened because the Supreme Court gave legal protection to racial terrorism. The enforcement acts became worthless. Reconstruction collapsed. By 1877, just 4 years after Colfax federal troops withdrew from the South, the Compromise of 1877 ended Northern occupation in exchange for making Rutherford B. Hayes president. And the moment those troops left, white supremacists took back every courthouse, every state legislature, every governor's mansion. Black elected officials were driven from office at gunpoint. Black voters were terrorized into silence. And then came the laws, the legal structures of Jim Crow, poll taxes that black people couldn't afford, literacy tests that even educated black people couldn't pass because white registrars failed them on purpose, grandfather clauses that said you could only vote if your grandfather voted, which excluded everyone whose grandfather was enslaved. These laws stayed in place until 1965. 90 years. 3 generations of black Americans locked out of democracy. All of it legal. All of it protected by the courts. All of it traceable back to U.S. versus Cruikshank and the Colfax Massacre. But Colfax wasn't unique. That's the part that should terrify you. That's the part they really don't want you to know. Because when you see the pattern, when you see how many times this happened, you realize this wasn't random violence. This wasn't a few bad actors. This was systematic extermination of black political power across the entire South. Let me show you. Hamburg, South Carolina, July 8, 1876. Just 3 years after Colfax. The town is small, maybe 1,000 people sitting right on the Georgia border. And just like Grant Parish, black people are the majority, and they control the government. Prince Rivers, a black man, serves as trial justice. The town has a black militia that drills every week, practicing formations, keeping their skills sharp. Legal, constitutional, protected by the same Reconstruction laws that created black voting rights. On July 4th, 2 white men are riding through Hamburg in a buggy. The black militia is doing their weekly drill in the street. The white men demand the militia move aside. The militia captain says, "Wait 5 minutes, we're almost done." The white men refuse to wait. They file charges of obstruction. It's absurd. It's petty. But it's a pretext. 3 days later, Benjamin Tillman shows up. Not related to Alexander Tillman from Colfax, different family, but the same white supremacist rage. Benjamin Tillman brings several hundred armed white men into Hamburg. They surround the militia armory and demand the black militia surrender their weapons. The militia refuses. These are legal weapons. This is a legal militia. We have rights. Tillman doesn't care about rights. He brings up a cannon. Same playbook as Colfax. Artillery against rifles. The white mob opens fire. The battle lasts several hours. When the black militia runs out of ammunition, they try to escape. Some make it into the woods. 6 don't. 6 black men are captured alive, and Tillman lines them up and executes them. One by one, shooting them in the back of the head while his men watch and cheer. 1 white man dies in the fighting. 6 black men executed after surrendering. And just like Colfax, nobody gets punished. Tillman doesn't go to jail. He doesn't even get arrested. Instead, he becomes a hero to white South Carolina. 20 years later, he's elected governor, then United States Senator. He serves in Washington, D.C. for decades, and he never stops bragging about Hamburg. In speeches on the Senate floor, he says we shot them down like dogs. Not ashamed, proud. The federal government does nothing. Because U.S. versus Cruikshank already decided that the feds can't intervene when white citizens murder black citizens. It's a state issue, and South Carolina isn't interested in prosecuting white men for killing black men. So the massacre stands, the message spreads. Organize politically, get killed. Form a militia, get slaughtered. Try to vote, face terrorism. Jump forward to 1898, Wilmington, North Carolina. This is different. This isn't a rural parish or small town. This is a city, and not just any city. Wilmington in 1898 is the only American city with a black majority government. Black mayor, black city councilman, black police officers, black firemen, black postmaster. Complete integration of city government. And it's working. The city is prosperous. Infrastructure is improving. Businesses are thriving. There's a black-owned newspaper called the Daily Record. The editor is Alexander Manley, and he writes editorials about racial equality and black achievement. White supremacists hate that paper, hate that it exists, hate that black people have a voice. So they plan something unprecedented in American history. They plan a coup, November 10th, 1898. 2 days after an election where white Democrats technically won some state offices. But instead of just taking those offices through normal process, they decide to overthrow the entire city government. 2,000 white men, armed with rifles and pistols, march through Wilmington's black neighborhoods. They're not hiding. They're not sneaking. They're an army, and their goal is ethnic cleansing. First target is the Daily Record. They smash the printing press, pour kerosene everywhere, burn the building to the ground. Then they start hunting black people, going house to house, shooting anyone who resists, burning homes. The violence lasts 2 days. Somewhere between 60 and 300 black people are killed. Nobody kept accurate records because the killers controlled the record keeping. The black mayor and city councilmen are forced to resign at gunpoint. They're put on trains and told never to come back. White Democrats install their own government. No election, no legal process, just force. This is the only successful coup d'etat in American history, the only time an elected government has been violently overthrown and replaced. And it happened to a black government. 2,000 black residents flee Wilmington permanently. They abandon homes, businesses, property. Everything they built, gone. White residents move in and take it. The wealth transfer is staggering, millions of dollars in property stolen. And the federal government does nothing. President McKinley knows what happened. Congress knows. But U.S. versus Cruikshank ties their hands. Can't intervene. State issue. And North Carolina isn't prosecuting anybody. Instead, North Carolina uses Wilmington as momentum to pass new laws. Literacy tests. poll taxes, grandfather clauses. Within 2 years, black voter registration drops from a 125,000 to 6,000, 95% suppression, legal, constitutional according to state courts, protected by federal indifference. Let's keep going. Ocoee, Florida, November 2nd, 1920, Election Day. A black man named July Perry has been organizing a voter registration drive, getting black residents signed up, encouraging them to vote. White supremacists warn him to stop. He doesn't. So on Election Day, when a black man named Mose Norman shows up at the polling place to vote, he's turned away. He goes to July Perry's house to ask what to do. That gives white supremacists the excuse they need. That night, a mob of white men attacks the black neighborhood in Ocoee. They burn 25 homes, 2 churches, a school. They hunt down July. Perry drag him to the county jail, then take him out, hang him from a tree, shoot his body full of holes, and burn what's left. 30 to 50 black people are killed. The exact number is unknown because bodies were hidden, thrown in lakes, buried in unmarked graves. Every single black resident of Ocoee, roughly 500 people, flees the town. Everyone. The entire black population gone within 48 hours, and Ocoee becomes a sundown town. That means no black people allowed after dark. Signs go up at the city limits. Don't let the sun set on you here. This stays in effect until the 1980s. 60 years. 2 generations of absolute racial exclusion. Nobody is prosecuted for the Ocoee Massacre. Nobody goes to trial. The property abandoned by fleeing black families gets claimed by white residents. More wealth transfer. More theft. And the federal government looks the other way. One more. Elaine, Arkansas. September 30th, 1919. Black sharecroppers are meeting at a church to organize a union. They want fair prices for their cotton. They're tired of being cheated by white landowners who control the scales, who charge inflated prices at the company store, who keep them in perpetual debt. The union meeting is legal, peaceful, just farmers trying to negotiate better terms. White landowners view this as insurrection. Black people organizing is always seen as insurrection. So they attack the church, shoot through the windows. The farmers defend themselves, fire back. One white attacker dies. That's all the excuse needed. The governor calls in 500 federal troops and 1,000 white vigilantes. They sweep through the Arkansas Delta hunting black people. Anyone suspected of union involvement. Anyone who ran from the initial attack. Anyone who looks suspicious. The killing goes on for a week. Low estimate is 100 black people dead. High estimate is 240. Federal troops participate. United States Army soldiers shooting American citizens for trying to form a union. The New York Times runs the headline, "Planned Negro Uprising Suppressed." Makes it sound like black people were the aggressors. They weren't. They were defending themselves. They were organizing for fair wages, and they were slaughtered for it. 200 black men are arrested, tortured until they confess to murder. 12 are sentenced to death. Eventually, outside lawyers get involved, appeal the cases, and the convictions get overturned. But nobody prosecutes the white mobs who did the actual killing. Nobody punishes the troops who participated in the massacre. It's Colfax all over again, Hamburg all over again, Wilmington all over again. Do you see it now? Do you see the pattern? Every single time black people organized politically massacre. Every single time black people defended their voting rights massacre. Every single time black people built economic power massacre. Every single time black people formed militias to protect themselves, massacre. And every single time they called it a riot instead of a massacre. Every single time they blamed black people for defending themselves. Every single time they arrested survivors instead of perpetrators. Every single time they erased it from textbooks. This wasn't random. This wasn't unconnected violence. This was policy. Unwritten but understood. Enforced by mobs but protected by law. The federal government knew. Presidents knew. Congress knew. The Supreme Court knew. And they chose to allow it. Chose to look away. Chose to prioritize white supremacy over black citizenship. U.S. versus Cruikshank gave them legal cover. States' rights became code for federal permission to commit genocide. From 1865 to 1920, there were hundreds of these massacres. Not dozens. Hundreds. Every southern state. Multiple incidents per state. Some documented, many lost to history because the killers destroyed records. Conservative estimates put the death toll at 10,000 black people murdered for political organizing. 10,000. That's not a riot. That's not unrest. That's systematic extermination. And the goal was always the same. Destroy black political power. Make black people too terrified to vote, too scared to organize, too traumatized to resist. Create such overwhelming terror that entire communities would accept disenfranchisement rather than face death. It worked. By 1900, black voter registration across the South dropped 90%. By 1910, it was nearly zero in most counties. 90 years of political lockout. 3 generations robbed of democracy. But the physical violence was only one weapon. The legal system provided another. And this is where the suppression gets truly diabolical. Because it's one thing to massacre people and hide the bodies. It's another thing to massacre people and then rewrite history so that future generations never know it happened. That's what they did with Colfax. That's what they did with all of them. Let's talk about how they erased this from your mind, how they made sure you never learned it in school, how they turned mass murder into footnotes or complete silence, starting with the textbooks. Louisiana history textbooks from the 1880s through the 1960s, 80 years of education, called Colfax the Colfax Riot. Not massacre. Riot. That word choice is deliberate. Riot means chaos, disorder, criminal behavior by a mob. Massacre means organized killing of defenseless people. They chose riot because it puts blame on the victims. It suggests black people were the problem, and white citizens restored order. In a 1956 Louisiana history textbook written by a historian named Roger W. Shugg, here's how Colfax gets described. The Colfax riot occurred when armed Negroes seized the courthouse and refused to surrender. 3 white men and approximately 100 Negroes were killed when order was restored. That's it. 2 sentences. No mention that black people were the legal government. No mention that they surrendered. No mention that they were executed after surrendering. No mention that it happened on Easter Sunday. No mention that Reverend Allen was holding a Bible. No mention of the hunting parties. No mention of bodies left to rot. 3 white men and approximately 100 Negroes. Even the body count is a lie. It was 3 white men killed in combat and 150 black people executed. But by saying approximately 100, the textbook minimizes the death toll and creates ambiguity. And by listing white deaths first, it subtly suggests white people were the primary victims. This textbook was used in Louisiana schools for decades. Thousands of children, black and white, learned this version. Learned that Colfax was a riot caused by armed Negroes. Learned that white men restored order. Multiple generations grew up not knowing the truth. Your grandparents went to schools that taught this lie. Your parents might have too. Even black families in Louisiana often didn't know the full story because it wasn't talked about, wasn't documented, wasn't preserved. This happened everywhere. Hamburg Massacre became Hamburg Riot in South Carolina textbooks. Wilmington Coup became Wilmington Race Riot in North Carolina. Elaine Massacre became Elaine Race War in Arkansas. Ocoee Massacre just disappeared entirely from Florida history books, not mentioned at all, completely erased. The pattern is consistent. Minimize, blame the victims, use passive language that obscures who did the killing. The Tulsa Race Massacre, where white mobs burned 35 blocks of the wealthiest black neighborhood in America and killed 300 people, was removed from Oklahoma textbooks entirely for 75 years. From 1921 to 1996, Oklahoma students learned nothing about Tulsa. 3 generations in the dark. Why does this matter? Because if you don't know your history, you can't understand your present. If you don't know that your great-great-grandfather was a landowner who got driven off his property at gunpoint, you might think your family's poverty is your fault. If you don't know that black elected officials governed fairly and were overthrown by coups, you might believe the lie that black people aren't capable of governance. If you don't know that every time black people built wealth, it got burned down, you might think the wealth gap is about work ethic instead of theft. They erased this history to make you forget your power, to make you forget that your ancestors were warriors who terrified white supremacy so much that it took armies to stop them. They wanted you to think of your ancestors as helpless victims waiting for white saviors. But that's a lie. Your ancestors were the saviors. They saved themselves. They fought. They governed. They built. And when they were massacred, they died standing up. But textbooks weren't the only tool of erasure. They also used monuments, physical markers that told the white supremacist version of history and forced you to see it every day. And nowhere is this more grotesque than the Colfax Monument. In 1921, 48 years after the massacre, Grant Parish erected a monument at the courthouse. Same courthouse where 150 black people were slaughtered. And here's what the inscription said. On this site occurred the Colfax riot, in which 3 white men and 150 Negroes were slain. This event on April 13, 1873, marked the end of carpetbag misrule in the South. Read that again. Marked the end of carpetbag misrule. The monument celebrates the massacre. It calls Reconstruction a period of misrule, meaning black governance was illegitimate. It frames the killing of 150 people as a good thing, a necessary restoration of proper order. And it stood there in public, in front of the courthouse, for 100 years. Imagine being a black resident of Grant Parish and having to walk past that monument. Having to see your ancestors' murders celebrated as heroic every single day. Having to take your children past it and explain that the stone says their great-great-grandfather deserved to die. That's not history. That's ongoing psychological terrorism. This monument stood until 2021. 100 years. It was only after nationwide protests following George Floyd's murder that Grant Parish finally agreed to change the inscription. The new version says, "On this site occurred the Colfax Massacre, in which 3 white men and 150 freedmen were slain." It calls it a massacre now, instead of a riot. It acknowledges the black victims were freedmen, not just Negroes. But it still doesn't tell the truth. It still doesn't say they were executed after surrendering. Still doesn't say the federal government failed to protect them. Still doesn't say the Supreme Court legalized their murders. And Colfax isn't unique. Across the South, monuments to white supremacy stand in front of courthouses, in town squares, in parks. Statues of Confederate generals who fought to preserve slavery. Monuments to the lost cause that claim the Civil War was about states' rights instead of slavery. Plaques commemorating white citizens who died defending civilization, which is code for killing black people. These aren't just old statues. They're not just history. They're messages. They say white supremacy won. They say resistance is futile. They say know your place. And when black communities ask for these monuments to be removed, they're told it's about heritage, preserving history. But it's not. Because if it was about history, they'd build monuments to the victims. They'd memorialize Levi Nelson and Alexander Tillman and Reverend Allen. They'd put plaques at massacre sites naming every person killed. They don't. They only memorialize the killers. That's not history. That's propaganda carved in stone. Then there's the media. Newspapers in 1873 and beyond shaped how America understood Colfax, and the coverage was a master class in manipulation. Southern newspapers called it a Negro insurrection. The New Orleans Times headline read, "Armed Negroes seize courthouse, white citizens restore order." Northern papers were only slightly better. The New York Times called it the Colfax Massacre, which at least named it correctly. But the article still suggested that black people provoked the violence by arming themselves. Harper's Weekly, one of the few publications that tried to tell the truth, published illustrations showing the massacre. But even those images got criticized as Northern propaganda. White Southern readers refused to believe them. They'd already bought the riot narrative, already believed that black people were inherently violent and white people were defending themselves. The truth couldn't penetrate that mindset. For decades after Colfax, any mention in media followed the same script. Riot, not massacre. Armed Negroes, not legal militia defending elected government. Order restored, not mass execution. This language becomes reality. When everyone calls it a riot, it becomes a riot in public memory. When every article blames black people that blame sticks, repeat a lie enough times, and it becomes accepted truth. Fast forward to modern times. Hollywood has made hundreds of movies about American history, movies about the Civil War, movies about Reconstruction, movies about the Civil Rights Movement. How many movies about Colfax Zero? How many movies about Hamburg Zero, Wilmington Zero, Ocoee Zero, Elaine Zero? The only massacre that's gotten significant film treatment is Tulsa, and that only happened recently. 100 years of silence, then one HBO series. Ken Burns made a documentary series called The Civil War that's considered definitive, 11 hours long, comprehensive coverage of the war and its aftermath. Colfax gets mentioned once in passing for maybe 30 seconds. No detail, no names, no explanation of its significance. Just a brief note that violence continued after the war. That's not documentation. That's erasure disguised as history. PBS has made multiple documentaries about Reconstruction. Some mention Colfax. None give it the weight it deserves. None explain that U.S. versus Cruikshank shaped civil rights law for a century. None connect Colfax to modern voter suppression. The dots are there. Historians know the connections. But documentaries don't draw the lines, because drawing the lines means admitting that current injustice has deep historical roots. Means admitting that the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. This is how suppression works in the modern era. You don't burn the documents. You just don't teach them. You don't ban the books. You just don't assign them. You don't forbid the discussion. You just change the subject. Death by 1,000 omissions. And the result is the same as if they'd destroyed every record. Multiple generations not knowing, not understanding, not connecting past to present. But now you know. Now you've seen the pattern. Now you understand how systematic this was. Which brings us to the question that should be burning in your mind right now. Why does this matter today? What does a massacre from 1873 have to do with your life in 2025? Everything. Absolutely everything.